Iraq is becoming the next Iran, not the way you might think. This isn't about whose regime Washington takes down next, not Venezuela, then Tehran, then Baghdad. That's a different story. This is about what's happening to Iraq itself. On March 24th, Iraq's highest Security Council declared all American troops inside the country legitimate military targets, open to attack by any means available, by any unit, without central command approval. Yeah, you heard that right. The government the United States installed in 2003 paid to rebuild and spent 2 decades and roughly $2 trillion propping up had just officially approved attacks on American soldiers still stationed on Iraqi soil. That decision didn't come from the Prime Minister's office. It came from the men with guns standing over it. 2 days earlier, Iraq's foreign minister had already said the quiet part out loud. Asked on camera whether Baghdad could actually control these paramilitaries, he answered, "I don't believe so. If it becomes a matter of control leading to conflict, I don't know who holds the balance of military power." So the question isn't why Iraq is firing at American troops. The question is how one of the richest oil states in the region ended up as a rubber stamp for militias it's legally supposed to command, and how those same militias became a remote control for Tehran. That's the story of how Iraq became the next Iran. Iraq didn't wake up like this. Most people watching already know what the IRGC is. Iran's parallel military, built in 1979 to defend the revolution. 4 decades later, roughly 190,000 personnel, a network of proxy militias across the region, and enough economic and political reach that Reuters this year described it as a state within a state. Now look at what's sitting inside Iraq. The Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, have 238,000 registered fighters. They draw a dedicated line in the federal budget, $3.4 billion in 2024. They operate their own intelligence, their own front companies, their own detention facilities. They answer to the Prime Minister on paper. In practice, the PMF's own Chief of Staff stated publicly in 2024 that the force takes its orders from Iran's supreme leader. Iraq's population is about 46 million. Iran's is about 90 million. The IRGC is about 0.2% of Iran. The PMF is about 0.5% of Iraq. The parallel military is more densely embedded inside Iraq than the original is inside Iran. By more than a factor of 2, there's one difference worth being precise about. The IRGC was designed from day one to be a parallel state. That was the entire point. The PMF wasn't when it was created in 2014 as an emergency. The Iraqi army had just lost Mosul, the country's second largest city, held by 60,000 soldiers and police on paper, overrun in less than a week by a few thousand ISIS fighters. A religious call to arms went out. Volunteers organized themselves into militias, and Iran's Quds force flew in within days to coordinate them. It was supposed to be temporary. In 2016, Parliament folded the PMF into the state, gave it salaries, gave it legal cover. That was meant to be a legalization, turned out to be an institutionalization. Whatever the intention, the outcome is the same shape. An armed organization, funded by the state, tied to a foreign power, stronger than the civilian government it nominally serves. Iran spent 40 years building this. Iraq got there in 12. The IRGC doesn't just carry guns, it runs an economy. Its main commercial arm, Khatam al-Anbiya, was set up in 1990. Since then, it has been awarded more than 1,200 government construction contracts with a combined estimated value of over $50 billion, most of them no bid. Construction, telecommunications, oil, ports, pipelines. By the time the US and the EU sanctioned it, Khatam al-Anbiya was embedded in every major sector of the Iranian economy. In November 2022, Iraq got its version. The Muhandis General Company was established by cabinet decree. Its mandate, on paper, covers construction, engineering, mining, agriculture, manufacturing, essentially any commercial activity of consequence. In practice, it is a PMF-owned conglomerate with preferential access to government tenders, exemption from the collateral requirements other contractors have to meet, and legal protection from public audits, a privilege otherwise held only by Iraqi intelligence. The company is named after Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the PMF deputy commander killed by a US drone strike near Baghdad airport in 2020. The name is the TEL. a man designated as a terrorist by the United States, now stamped on the letterhead of an Iraqi government-owned firm. The state added roughly $305 million to the company's investment budget in its first year of operation alone. A land grant of 1.2 million acres along the Saudi border, territory that sits on a corridor previously used by PMF drones striking Gulf targets, and a growing list of construction, real estate, and fiber optic contracts awarded without competitive bidding. Outside the company, other PMF-aligned factions generate an estimated $1 billion a year from oil smuggling alone. In October 2025, the US Treasury formally sanctioned the Muhandis General Company. The Treasury's own statement described the company as modeled on Qatam al-Anbiya, diverting Iraqi state funds to Iran-aligned militias and serving under cover of agricultural activity as a vehicle for weapons smuggling coordinated with the IRGC. The model was not even hidden. At this point, a simple question becomes unavoidable. If the PMF is funded by the Iraqi state and its loyalty runs to Tehran, why doesn't Baghdad just cut it off? The answer is that Baghdad can't. The $3.4 billion isn't payment for services. It is protection money, not from external threats. Protection of the civilian government from the armed force that is, on paper, working for it. Three things make it irreversible. First, the legislature, the coordination framework, the Shia political bloc aligned with the PMF factions, is the largest coalition in Iraq's parliament. It is the body that selects the prime minister. Any prime minister who moves against PMF funding can be replaced by the same parliament that appointed him. Not threatened, replaced legally. Second, the money. Between the Muhandis General Company, the land holdings, and the smuggling, major PMF factions no longer depend on the state budget for survival. Losing the $3.4 billion would hurt. It would not be fatal. The state is not holding the leash it thinks it is. Third, the guns. 238,000 fighters deployed across Iraq, including on bases inside Baghdad itself. There has never been a realistic scenario in which the Iraqi army, smaller, weaker, and less politically protected, moves against the PMF without triggering a civil conflict. The government would not survive. Washington didn't always see it this way. For most of the last 2 decades, the American approach to the PMF was to treat Baghdad as the responsible party, press the civilian government, demand reforms, keep the aid flowing, and assume that somewhere inside the Iraqi state there was a lever that could be pulled. That assumption only really broke in the last year. In October 2025, the U.S. Secretary of State called the Iraqi Prime Minister and said it out loud. It was time to disarm the Iran-backed militias. That was the first time an American official that senior had used the word disarm in public. Baghdad's response was to pretend the word had never been said. The official readout of the call, the version released by the Iraqi Prime Minister's office, left it out entirely. The conversation happened. The demand was ignored. After that, Washington's strategy shifted. The pressure stopped going through the civilian government and started going around it. In October, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned the Muhandis General Company, cutting the PMF's commercial arm out of the dollar-based banking system. Yesterday, the Treasury went further and suspended physical dollar shipments to the Central Bank of Iraq. This is the hard currency that underwrites the entire Iraqi economy. Every salary, every import, every government contract is settled in U.S. dollars. The condition for turning the tap back on was made explicit. Form a new government free of Iranian influence, arrest specific militia commanders under indictment, or keep losing access to the currency the country runs on. This is the kind of pressure you apply when you've given up on the idea that the other side can deliver on its own. The timing isn't accidental. 4 days ago, on April 18th, Iran's Quds Force commander made his first public trip outside Iran since the war began, to Baghdad. He spent the day in 4 closed-door meetings with Shia political leaders and militia commanders. The same week, the U.S. Special Envoy was also in Baghdad, running his own parallel set of meetings, 2 rival mediators in the same capital, working the same factions, trying to shape the same decision. Who becomes the next prime minister of Iraq? The current frontrunner is Nouri al-Maliki. He was prime minister 12 years ago. He spent his second term purging non-loyalists out of the Iraqi army, running a sectarian domestic policy that pushed Sunni provinces straight into the arms of ISIS, and then presiding over the military collapse that required the PMF to exist in the first place. he is one of the most openly pro-Tehran senior politicians in Iraqi public life. In a very direct sense, he is the political father of the armed structure Washington is now trying to dismantle. The US president has stated publicly that if Maliki is confirmed as prime minister, American support for Iraq ends. So far, Baghdad has not moved. What's happening here has a name beyond becoming Iran. A government whose armed forces report abroad, a state-owned conglomerate that doubles as another country's sanctions evasion vehicle, a foreign minister on camera, unable to say who holds military power inside his own borders. That isn't just Iran-shaped, that's a client state. But client state usually implies financial dependence. Tehran sends the money, Baghdad takes the orders. That isn't what's happening here. The PMF draws its budget from Iraqi oil revenue, its real estate from Iraqi state land, its smuggling income from Iraqi territory. Iran provides the ideology, some of the weapons technology, and a certain amount of senior political direction. It does not provide the paycheck. Iraq has become something stranger, a client state that pays for itself, which is exactly what makes the next chapter uncertain. Iran, in 2026, is in the worst economic condition it has been in for decades. The war has emptied its reserves. Domestic unrest has not stopped. If the coordination framework succeeds in installing Nouri al-Maliki as prime minister this spring, Baghdad will be politically closer to Tehran than at any point since 2003. But what, exactly, will Tehran have to offer a partner that no longer needs its money? At a moment when Tehran can barely afford the partnership itself, Iraq's drift toward Iran is real. Whether the two can actually stay hand in hand for another decade is a separate question. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you won't want to miss the video right up here in the top left. Check it out now. Meeting adjourned.